Thank you all for being here today. Wow, it's quite the packed room. I think this sets a record in the chamber for this audience, and I think the reason why is that Mr. Simonsen is really one of the more interesting observers and commentaries and thoughtful people about Brazil. I remember last year we did a similar event, and I was really quite remarkable. And we at the chamber are very proud of our relationship with the FGV. And proud of our ability to present events like this that help bring understanding to Brazil. Before we get going, and actually part of the reason for our delay is that we have so many distinguished representative judges here that we had to make sure we had them on. I want to first recognize the president of the STJ, Ministro João Octavio de Noronha, and several of his ministers from the STJ, Felipe Salomão, Ministro Vilas Boas Queixa, Ministro Mauro Campbell, Campbell as we say in English, and Minister Antonio Saldanha. So I would like to recognize and appreciate that. I also see Ministro Dengue from the consulate is here, and so a very distinguished crowd, and we look forward to your remarks.
Então eu vou começar em português por 2 segundos. Me pediram para falar em inglês, então eu vou falar em inglês. So, it's a pleasure to be here today. And as usual, I have to present a very complicated subject in half an hour. And I was thinking how I should introduce what I have to tell you today. And, well, hoping there would be some Americans, perhaps an Englishman or two, I would say that I feel like the main character on Dickens' Tales of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was a time of upheaval. This is what I feel about Brazil. Brazil has definitely come to a crossroads. First observation that I should make is that 68 has finished. I mean, both on the right and on the left. People that gained power because of 1968. So that's just a number to remember that 1968 was a complicated year everywhere in the world. The people that gained power in 68 left power in this country a long time ago. They left power in France a long time ago, in Germany, and so forth. But in Brazil, for several different reasons, they are leaving power now. What does it mean? It means that we still have to cope with an old mentality regarding business. Why do a third of the 30 most important German firms, 29, be the same as they were in 1900? Why are the firms that are on the Dow Jones, the only one that survived for 100 years was GE and has left the Dow Jones last year? What is the reason for that? Why does the US have a Google? Why doesn't Brazil? There are many reasons. But most important of all is that we are still building our democracy. People say we are democratic. Yes, there are liberties, there are rights, there is an independent judiciary, but there are some institutions which are still missing. One, the most important of them, is a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition for development, and that is a good budgetary process. Too technical, but roughly speaking, What do I mean by the budgetary process? It's a discussion on how you tax, how much you tax, and what you do with that money. That is missing. So, the rule is that Brazil under-leverages. There's not enough leverage. If you go to São Paulo and fly over São Paulo, you'll see a fantastic city, and you have to realize that all those skyscrapers, most of them were built cash. They were not built with credit. This is not true for New York, this is not true for Chicago, this is not true for London. Mostly in Brazil, you don't have credit. Oh, nowadays you have consumer credit given by banks. But that's the type of fast thing. You lend the money, you take it back. Why is that so? Because of a profile of internal debt. The profile of internal debt has everything to do with the budgetary process. So, Brazil still has that flow. And I expect that slowly, step by step, we will be able to circumvent that difficulty. That's not going to be easy. That's going to be difficult. The first step should be to attack the pension problem. But the pension problem is a precondition for building a good budgetary process. So let us stop here at this discussion. Let us look at the numbers in Brazil. If I am capable of, okay. So last time I came here, I pointed out that our GDP was 2.2 trillion. Now dollars. Now it's at 1.8, and we are an average income country. Actually, we are three countries. One is mostly developed. The other one is half developed. And the third part is not developed at all. On average, we have an income per capita of a little bit over $8,000. That is about 1/5 or 1/6 of American income. Well, maybe it's not good to compare with the United States. You see, Americans cheat when they teach you economics. They say, well, let us be liberals. If you are liberals, you will do everything well. You will do well. But this is not such a liberal country in terms of economics. And of course, the dollar doesn't rely only on the power of American public finances, which, by the way, are in an equivalent shape to Brazilian ones. There are two differences, however. One is that the US has a good budgetary process. As I said, it is a necessary, not a sufficient condition for having a sequence of good budgets and therefore implying a good profile of debt. But they had it in the past, and they had a custom of having a good profile of debt. And public debt is a benchmark for private savings to pivot towards private investment. So if I want to take a loan to buy this building and restore it, it is available, and not only available, I would pay perhaps 2.5, 3% more than the official rate, meaning the rate on the comparable T-bill rate. So this is one part. And the other part, of course, is that why is the dollar international reserve currency? It's simple. They have the biggest navy in the world. So if you have a navy, if you go to Dubai, it's very simple. You see Dubai, you see the carriers there. So oil has to be traded in dollars. Without that, oil wouldn't be traded in dollars. And if oil is traded in dollars, energy is being traded in dollars, the dollar is international reserve currency. And therefore, the US has the ability to export concessions. We in Brazil, we don't. So maybe we should compare ourselves, our situation with that of Germany. And if we looked at Germany, our budgetary process would have to have macroeconomic conditions for a fiscal equilibrium to be guaranteed a priori. And no problem. Let us not speak too much about that. In Brazil, we noticed that when our primary surplus went down the drains, so the debt relatively to GDP started increasing. So there's something very simple for us to do. Cut the spending and the debt will probably recede. If you cut it enough, the debt will recede. But cutting the debt means cutting the pie, reducing the distribution of the pie, and that is a political problem. So, these elections also have to deal not only with the fact that there is a generation of politicians that has been left behind, it also has to deal with the fact that you have to reduce the distribution in order to tax less. And this is not a simple task. This is why Mr. Guedes, the appointed, or better say, anointed, new Minister of Finance, is saying that he has to free revenue from constraints, meaning tax on gas should not go to a specific usage. It could go to the Treasury, and then the Treasury should decide. Well, a recession, the devaluation of a currency explains the 1.8 trillion instead of 2.2, or better say, instead the 2.5 where we should be right now. Is it possible to recover? To recover the time that we lost? It is. It is. You see, if you look at the current account, you see that the deficit has been reduced enormously. And if you go deeper into numbers, you will see that the quality of the deficit has improved. One thing is to have a negative current account because you are importing machinery or technology for producing more, for increasing the aggregated value of your products. Another thing is to import automobiles, perfumes, and so forth. So, not only Brazil has a smaller current account deficit, but also its quality has changed in the last 2.5, 3 years. Moreover, the amount of money that is being brought into Brazil has been increasing. So reserves are increasing. And one explanation for lowering interest rate is that we don't want to pay these reserves. They don't stay on the bank. They are switched to reais, and we don't want to pay so much interest. And we have, since inflation is contained, we simply have no reason to pay so much interest, and we are reducing the interest rate, which is good for consumption at this moment. Why do I say for consumption? Because basically the profile of internal debt, public debt, still doesn't allow a proper benchmark for private savings to go to private investments. Let me give you an example to make everyone understand. If I have an industry, I want to invest $1 billion. The safe thing is to issue a bond. I don't have to do it for $1 billion, but I have credit. I would issue a bond, and I would park the money that I get from my bonds onto government bonds. That supposedly is safe. And the difference of cost, is the cost I have to build up my new industry. But right now, I don't have a benchmark. The benchmark is when it exists, when you say you have long-term Brazilian bonds. They are not enough. The benchmark is not strong enough. There are, of course, a series of doubts regarding laws, defaults, how do you punish defaults in the judiciary. That's a complementary discussion. I didn't say complementary, I said complementary discussion. So interest rate has been going down, unemployment rate with a recession has risen. Worse, it is not a transitory movement. The natural rate of unemployment has fallen. Why? Because of the last graph. Investment has gone down in the last years. In the 4 or 5 years since 2014, we have invested less than we should, and therefore the natural rate of unemployment has risen. And this is something that people are not saying too much. So possibly it is around 8% right now. It corresponds to the fact that we have been slow in absorbing technology. So, the structural deficit increase, the budget rigidity, the lack of expenditure control, or let us say this cap on expenditures, in my opinion, is not the best way to fight the public deficit. If you want to fight the public deficit, you do it Big Bang style. You have to start at once. You don't delay to your successor, as it was done, the fight against the public deficit. And the pension reform is essential. But all of these are not enough. Budgetary process, budget execution, aligned to economic planning, meaning the important thing is national strategy. National strategy is a set of public policies as they are designed. At the end, that yields a budget. And the budget has to be followed, but not only the numbers, the objectives. We don't pay enough attention to the objectives. So, the tendency is that everything becomes a gigantic payroll. So we have to go for budgetary reforming, which actually means that our planning and implementation, our execution on the side of the government has to improve in quality enormously. So, the new government starts with this very big challenge. Moreover, we have a little bit less of 12% of our workers unemployed. This means that there is a huge social pressure. So it's my impression that in one side you will have to make very strong adjustment, and on the other side you also have to produce a minimal set of appeasing policies. You cannot simply do, or you should not simply do, a liberal, in the British sense of the word, economic shock. Because if unemployment goes up again and faster, what are the political results? Within 2 years we will have elections for mayors of big metropolitan areas. They are very powerful. But all of this has to be reasoned around. It's not an easy task. So, this is one possible forecast. GDP growth 2.5% this year, next year, in 2020. A primary surplus slowly converging to zero. Net public sector debt, meaning gross debt minus the value of international reserves, stabilizing around 60%. What is a good number? No one knows. Okay? You see, if you take a country that has a good budgetary process, it may have a debt to GDP ratio much bigger than a country that has a bad budgetary process. Why? Because the debt is not guaranteed by a name, by a minister. The debt is guaranteed by an institution. Do of course remember that one of the main reasons why Great Britain was capable of winning the war against Napoleon was public finances. France had this tradition of an absolute king. He could borrow money and then default. In England, no. The Parliament would say how much the government could borrow. Many of the members of the Parliament would buy the debt, and therefore they would be interested in it being paid. This was and is a big difference. So, this is a scenario, and I hate to forecast so much into the future, that has a hypothesis. The external shock that will come with American interest rate going up, let us say above 3.5%, is going to come smoothly. It's not going to be so strong against us because of the price of commodities, because of international geopolitical competition, for many reasons. But if ever you affect foreign direct investment, the current account would have to be adjusted. There are two ways of adjusting the current account. One is devaluing your currency. And if you devalue the currency, you will have an impact on inflation 6 or 10 months later. And you will have to raise interest rates, short-term interest rates. Therefore, economic activity would be compromised. So this scenario is supposing that the world is not such a disaster we raise our internal interest rate a little bit, we contain inflation around 4.5%, that is feasible. And provided that happens, we will be able to continue on the path, continue democratically onto the path of reforms. What are the conditions? In blue, you have those that are supposed to support Bolsonaro. Darker blue are 100% firm with him. Lighter blue has to be negotiated. Gray, they are neutral, they could go one way or the other. And red is the opposition. The first block is Congress, is a Chamber of Deputies, and the second block is the Senate. So he has a condition to do it in both houses of our parliament if he is capable of negotiating. He will do it. First step, pension reform. Will he take the big risk of big banging pension reform? Meaning, when I came to be 60, I asked for my pension. I wanted to stop paying. I didn't mind not receiving if they didn't pay me. I simply wanted not to pay anymore. Now what you have to do is tell people. Doesn't matter if you have 37 years of contributions. You may only retire if you are 10, 65 if you are a woman, 62, 63. Of course, you have to do it well. You have to properly do it, because that thing is going to go to the tribunal. And we will get back into that discussion that is recurrent in Brazil, which is the discussion on acquired rights. Acquired rights that you never say against whom they were acquired. They were acquired against everyone, of course. Someone has to pay the bill. They were acquired against our children, grandchildren, and so forth. So, that is going to be a difficult step. But not only that. You have to restore the quality of public spending. In February, I told the former president of Petrobras, look, why don't you try to change taxation on gas and diesel and so forth from an ad valorem tax, which is 70% of the consumer price, to an ad rem tax. Ad rem means a fixed price per liter. He thought and said, that's a very good idea, but it's not my job to do it. He's not the president of Petrobras. Why? It's very simple. The dollar and oil move together. which was to be expected, by the way, because now the US is the largest oil exporter in the world. So, what happened? What happens is that we have to change this type of taxation. It indexes public finances to supply shocks. In Brazil, we herald, we have finished with indexation. That is a lie. We finished indexation of a private sector, or we contained it, but we didn't end the indexation of the public sector, especially when it's very subtle like this. I'm not speaking about wage indexation, negotiation pressures. This is a normal thing in any part of the world. The subtle thing is that if oil goes up, if the dollar goes up, then the finances of Rio de Janeiro are saved without having to do any adjustment. You may continue to spend lavishly. You may continue to create pensions that have no moral justification and so forth. People retire at the age of 45. In Rio Grande do Sul, one of the members of the government that is leaving now, was furious, and he told me, we have a major from the police force, a lady. She retired at the age of 40. She said that she was too nervous to stay in her job. So, this is going to be the discussion, and I hope that one day we will recreate a central administration for the public service as we had in the past. And when these uses were contained. So if you look at the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate, it is clear that with some effort, and that, by the way, implies that you have to continue the democratic path. It's good. It's good that the government doesn't have 70% majority everywhere. You have to have negotiation. In a clear way, you may provide many of the reforms that the country has to have. But if we fix attention only on these reforms, we could make a list. This is a short-term list. Pension reform, privatization, subsidies reduction, government size reduction, more concessions, PPPs, privatizations, economic regulations, probably taxing dividends, different forms of taxing corporate, and independent central banks, reduction of a number of ministries. We have to come into agreement and simply recognize that the United States is more important than Argentina. For us, at least. Okay? I'm not speaking militarily, it's just business. Tariffs reduction. We have to change our taxation. One says, why Brazil has to have a huge tax on industrialized products. The explanation is always the same. If you look at the auto industry, they pay very little income tax. Look, reduce industrial tax step by step. And if the right taxes on income are not paid, you just put the manager in jail. That's what the US does. That is what we should do. So no big deal. Taxes would be paid, we would have a correct source of revenue. And moreover, the government wouldn't be the partner to come first in a business. If I am an entrepreneur, and we need entrepreneurs, if I am an entrepreneur and I start a business in Brazil, and I get a revenue of 100, probably the first thing that I have to do is to pay 20 or 30 of those 100 as taxes, even before I calculate my profit. So this has to change. There is a very simple model by a former professor of Princeton who was also president of the University of Chicago, Hugo Sonnenschein, that shows very clearly that the number of companies, firms, acting on a market is inversely affected by the amount of ad valorem tax that you have. In other words, why the firms in Germany, of the 30 biggest firms, 29 are the same? Because the VAT in Germany is 20%. Why isn't the same true for the US? Because the VAT here varies from 4 to 10%. So the higher VAT you have, the less competition you have. Brazil has specialized in having oligopolies everywhere, every sector. So Brazil is not immune to what is happening in the world, although we have to recognize that our deepest desire would be to be on planet Mars. That's true. Brazilians think that they are part of a Western world, and where is Roberto, who was with me at Philadelphia? And the people say, no, we are not part of the Western world. We think that we are close to the West, and in fact traveling from Rio to London takes about 12 hours, and from London to Tokyo takes 10 and a half. We're further away. We still have a too mercantilistic view of the world, and that is one of the reasons why we don't develop a competitive industry. We don't expose ourselves enough. We have built BNDES not to foster the aggregation of value on our exports, but to foster big companies that live on the differentiation of the interest rate between what is charged by the market and what is charged by the BNDES. So, what should we do? There is the United States, as important as the Amazon, in fact, the Mercosur, the United Nations, the OECD, Europe, Africa, China, the South Atlantic. There's all of this. 100 different problems, 100 different constraints. And yes, we still have a backwards-looking international strategy. If you look at what Baron of Rio Branco created, it was a fantastic job. He had this very clever insight. The United States is a rising power. And it is going to help us to deal with Europeans on role doctrine, etc. And Europeans, of course, help us deal with the United States. So Brazil adopts a multilateralist approach, not to be smashed by bigger powers. This has lasted for 100 years. May I ask the Americans present to forgive me? The United States has become the most powerful country many, many years ago. From most powerful, you cannot go upwards. An increase for a while, but you don't go upwards. And clearly, there is a public finance challenge now, because you have to decide here in this country where you are going to put your money. Let me recall a story from ancient Greece. Every year, Athenians had defeated the Persians and had a naval empire from which they became very rich. They had a fleet, 20,000 boats, small boats, wood boats. And every year they had a vote. After the constructions in Athens, public constructions, the Parthenon is one of such. The walls were another, but you don't see the walls because they were torn down by the Spartans. Every year there was a vote. The vote was, should we invest on the fleet, maintenance of the fleet, or should we invest on social policies? Medicare, Medicaid, the equivalent. And of course, what was the result of a vote? Medicare, Medicaid. For 20 years they did this. At the end, the fleet was weaker, and someone had this wonderful idea. Let us use the fleet to recover the power of the fleet. Let us attack someone. That was the mentality at the time, not of today. Let us attack someone, take its money, and Athens will recover its power. Persians are too strong. The Phoenicians are allies of the Persians. So let us attack the Greek city of Syracuse in Sicily. They attacked Syracuse. They were defeated once. They tried a second time. They were defeated the second time. The fleet became less operational. The empire rebelled. Attica rebelled. The Spartans said hello, and they came to the walls of Athens, and Athens was defeated. I don't mean that this is the situation of the United States. It's much more sophisticated. The tendencies are there. The conundrum is how to use the other forces to avoid this. And it is exactly what the US is doing now. The Brazilian strategy has to recognize this. The partner with which we share a series of common values and even common geopolitical interests has a deep strategic challenge. And this challenge, although we want to stick our heads on the floor, this challenge affects everyone. Chinese, American competition, geopolitical competition. It's not a simple competition. It's competition with cooperation sometimes. But it is becoming more of a competition. Question around the South China Sea may affect Brazilian exports one day. So all of this put together, since we don't have a practical word to say about this, we simply are irrelevant from a military point of view at this point in time, we have to think what are our possibilities and what should be our strategies to diversify, to cope with adverse situations. This is not easy. I hope that in the next 20 years, it's the time for these things to develop. Brazil will somehow march on to the direction of having more equilibrium between the public and the private sector. That it will position itself more affirmatively economically in the world arena. And that it will evolve from a multilateralist diplomatic culture to a culture that has to deal more with bilateral agreements. So this is what I don't like to make forecasts, but not even on the level of this afternoon. But I think that from what we study, from what we see, it's interesting. It's going to happen, no matter what. Oh, and by the way, just a final point of curiosity. This election also changed one thing. We made a return to a Brazilian tradition that is over 100 years old. So, if you look at all the countries down the Rio Grande, as the Americans say, they have politically evolved from the influence of a Masonic lodges as in America. Only here the Masonic lodges were of Scottish origin, and in Brazil they were Iberian, and from there they were French. So the difference is that here you think Hume, there you think Voltaire, Rousseau, Montaigne. The nature of the state is part of our discussion right now, and people are not noticing it. Thank you very much for your patience and support. If anyone has questions, I would gladly answer them if I know.
Microphone. Professor, how do you reconcile the promises during the campaign with the actual delivery after? Like in the case of Brazil now, you show the Congress and the possible support, but do you think it's feasible to make it possible, those reforms that we've been discussing for so many years? What is your thought?
Well, first of all, this election was started as a vote against the PT. This is a tremendous asset for President Bolsonaro. If he does 10 instead of 100, it will be considered a success. People know that the situation is different. Even the results of PT in the Northeast, the government has every condition to change public opinion there in the next 4 years. So my guess is, if you do the right things, even if your success is medium in the middle term, you may continue to have political support, and conservatives would remain in power for a long time. You have to remember that from 1837 to 1988, Brazil was ruled by conservatives. And that was mostly a succession of councils, prime ministers, we call them president of council, that were all members of the same Masonic lodge, the Grand Orient in Rio. So this represented the liberal thinking, British style, economic liberal thinking of the 1800s, sorry. And they were very successful up until the War of Paraguay, when Brazil had a huge military victory, which was a Pyrrhic victory. Yes, why? Because we won the war and lost the economy. So, between the two, I would still lose the economy. And 6 years to recover from the shock of that war. Then you have the return of a more conservative and different style, a pre-Gaullist, style, when Getulio Vargas came to power. And he changed certain moment, according to the times, this changed to a more fascist government. So conservatives have been around all the time, and they are responsible for Brazilian territorial union. This is the case in the US. So the Republican Party here had a very important role in keeping the union. So I expect the discussion on the nature of the state to be the underlying core. This discussion is a discussion about acquired rights. Which acquired rights should be preserved, which acquired rights should be dropped. What are legitimate acquired rights, what aren't. And this definition of legitimate has everything to do with possibilities, not with the past. I shouldn't say this in front of judges, but this is reality. So, any other question?
Yes. Napoleon used to say, don't bring me the smart generals, bring me the lucky ones. He made a case that Lula was a lucky general in some sense. So I'm saying this because the question is, what do you think are going to be the sources of growth for Brazil going forward, given that China is bound to continue decelerating, probably rates will not help at the global level? What will be the engines of growth?
repeat the question?
The question is, what are going to be the engines of growth in Brazil going forward, given that China is bound to decelerate, so you're not going to be relying on the low-hanging fruit of the commodity prices, and rates at the global level will continue going higher, so the easy sources of growth will not be there anymore, and you're going to have to do a nasty fiscal adjustment. So in terms of even beyond the Bolsonaro term, medium term, what are the sources of growth for Brazil?
Let me disagree with you, if you allow me. First of all, we have a per capita ratio of natural resources, which is at least 40% above that of the US, which is a very good one, and 3 times that of Europe. Just have to compare population and territory. Natural resources go into proportion. If you consider that Brazil would be completely, we would be completely fools. We would be fools if we didn't use that. Petrobras is possibly going to export more than 1 million barrels of oil a day at $80 within a year and a half. We are already exporting 600,000. We could export 1.2, 1.5 million barrels a day by end of 2019. And even if oil goes down back again to 60, that's a hell of a money. It's a hell of a money. And the Chinese, even if they grow less, even if the government becomes more harsh in China, more socialist, they have to eat. So we are going to sell them food. We are going to sell food to anyone, to everyone. This is going to help. But we shouldn't rely on that. With that idea, I agree. With the idea that we have to have more technology onto our products, I would say that that's eminently important. But then you come to the question, is what should we do about our R&D investment? Do we know how to invest in R&D? And if you told me, no, Brazilians don't know, I would agree. If you ask Brazilians, give me examples of good Brazilian technology, they will say, well, there is Petrobras that digs oils 4,000 meters under the surface of the water, there is Embraer, 2 more companies, and then they keep on thinking, and they don't remember. Why is that so? Because our investment in R&D is not properly managed. We invest too much in basic science, too little on technology development. We don't know, we should copy the Americans. The Americans, they invest 2% of GDP. We invest 4%. And the Americans are more efficient than the Koreans in aggregating value using technology. Why? Half of their investment is done through the military. It doesn't mean that they only want to build weapons. We should remember that the internet, the Wi-Fi, many of the things that we enjoy, the pleasures today, were built first by the military. Why does it work? Because we are more organized. So we have to get more organized. Before this, I started this talk. I was telling this gentleman, Mr. Al, that and the US, when the Russians, the Soviets, set the challenge of space almost 60 years ago. When they first launched the Sputnik, then launched Laika, then Gagarin went to space. America was defeated every time. And then Kennedy said, "Man on the moon." Nice phrase. There was a small problem. The US also had to build a certain set of ICBMs to make sure that the Russians wouldn't make a strike. This was a very dangerous time. And they had 10,000 top engineers. 10,000 top engineers may sound like a lot of engineers, but it is not. So, 10,000 were necessary for the ICBMs and 10,000 for men on the moon, and they only had 10,000. So they invented something called the Delphi method to accelerate the use of human resources through speeding decision mechanisms. There are only 3 countries in the world that properly developed this method: the US, Germany, and Japan. I don't know about Russia. Probably so too. This has to do, but the Delphi method here is used on a simplified version by companies. Now it has new names, all the culture of linear programming, dynamic programming. Microsoft project is a great grandson, came from the military. Statistical control, and so forth. So it's not. We have to learn how to aggregate value. And in my opinion, the NDS should focus on helping medium-sized companies to aggregate value. Any other question?
Professor, here. From my data, Brazil has registered around 6 to 7 quarters of growth in the since the end of 2016. What would you say, how far are we in years from recovering pre-recession levels, 2014, if the President and the Congress is well aligned with the reforms that you mentioned that have to be done? Just a guess.
Sorry to say, but that is the type of question that my son would ask when he was 14. The important thing is not only to recover growth. Growth is important. You have to recover the social conditions. And you have to see your relative position to others. So, many things have changed in the world. You should not think that Brazil is on Mars. Why do you have a shift on the right in Europe and in the US? It's very simple. There is a tremendous Asian shock being produced, and that is the rise of productivity in Asia. The standard of living of the middle class of the Western countries, and varying to Brazil, a poorer cousin but still in the West, is being transferred to the East. How is that done? Innovation. No one noticed that when the Fukushima accident happened. The crane that was helping to throw water there was not Japanese, it was Chinese. Do you know that the fastest computer in the world nowadays is Chinese? Do you know that Tsinghua University, which was built to challenge the MIT, has for the first time published a larger number of scientific articles on Western journals, not in Chinese, that is bigger than MIT. So, in the world, if you forget credit and branding, there are only two things: innovation and natural resources. Your standard of living depends on that. If you don't have natural resources, you have to have more and more innovation. Look at Europe. The fact that it's not that Europe is reducing its rhythm of innovation, but that it has lost its relative rhythm of innovation. Relative to whom? To Asia, especially Asia ex-Japan. And not many people understand this. Because if you only have two things, if you have more innovation in Asia, this is more competitive, it will buy the natural resources. So you go to France, you can buy one egg in the supermarket and a slice of ham. And you see nowadays people sleeping at the Boulevard des Capucines everywhere in Paris, in the middle of the street.
Professor, we talked a lot about the difficulties in the fiscal side of Brazil ahead, and that the correction is going to go through very painful measures. The pension reform and cut in expenses, possible rise in taxes. There's going to be elections in 2 years. Obviously, the challenges to keep the political support are obviously high. It's difficult. My question to you is, how difficult is it? Are there low-hanging fruit that the new government can distribute to kind of navigate this challenge in a more optimistic way?
Yes, and there is a risk there. Yes, the government, as I already said, has put out certain measures which corresponds to a liberal shock on the economy. On the other hand, it will have to provide certain appeasing measures. The relative side will determine which type of support you have. But it also exposes us more or less to an external shock coming either from a geopolitical situation, which I don't think it's for now, but it is for now, but certainly from an accelerated rise on American interest rates, especially, and this is something technical, you have a flat yield curve, almost flat. The day starts becoming more normal, and that you have an inflection point somewhere. This inflection point will move. And the curve will become like this. So, that's easy. Kind of draw it. It will become like this. Now it's almost flat. This will have tremendous consequences for emerging markets. For emerging markets. I hope Brazil, with its $400 billion of reserves, will have had the time to create enough fiscal credibility so that the shock in us will be small. We also have to recognize one thing. We have a problem to attract American investments, which would be geopolitically important. Why is that so? It is not because Americans don't like us. It's simply because the biggest emerging market is here. No one says that. The biggest emerging market is the NASDAQ. So we should try to integrate more. There are some Brazilian companies opening their capital here, and that is important. But up to what measure should we do that? We don't have a model for that. No one has thought about that properly. And I think it's still too early. However, external shocks will come independently of what we wish, or if we wish them to wait until we have thought about how to deal with them. We'll keep coming. So, this is a big challenge. Should we not take the risk? I think it's not feasible. We should take some risk. Any other questions?
Professor, since you mentioned Spartans and their Athenians, it came to my mind what Sophocles said in Oedipus the King. Pantagar cannot calar. With time, everything will be harmonized. My belief, strong belief, is that this government, elected and the forthcoming government, will be top priority to education, and most of all, focusing on technology and innovation, as you just said. And as a new Hegelian, I say that I strongly believe in the inexorable evolution, qualitative evolution, to the best. And consequently, if we achieve that, we materialize what Jean-Jacques Rousseau mentioned in the social contract. The primordial duty of the state is to control the exchequer and to be the guarantor of the well-being of all citizens. And I have also a belief, I wonder whether you agree with that the propensity of the new government will be bilateral agreements with all nations of the world, most of all, the United States of America, China, Japan, and the whole Europe, on a bilateral basis. I believe that bilateral agreements will prevail over multilateral agreements. I wonder whether you agree with that.
On the last point, that's exactly what I said.
Yes.
But listen, Stalin, whenever he wanted to change his foreign policy, he killed all diplomats. I'm not for that. No, I'm not for that, really. The point is that you have to prepare yourself for something for which you don't have a culture to. You have to evolve. There have been 110 years very successful. We ought to think what the Baron would think, would say. Now, the situation, the underlying assumptions have changed. So, take what happened before, 30 years ago. Two big blocs interacting geopolitically and militarily, but no economic interaction. No going to bed together tonight. At night. Nowadays, China and the US go to bed every night together. Okay? So, it's not as easy as it was. Not simply a question of the Chinese Navy growing in the south, on the South China Sea, and basically, they are not saying, but it's implied that we don't want the American Navy here. And the Americans saying we are going to stay because we have to guarantee the oil lanes to our allies Japan and Korea. And of course we don't want them to converge to you, or else you would be such a strong bloc that we could be dwarfed. this cannot happen. But, well, it is a different world. It is a completely different world. We are not going to, the balance of power game around the South China Sea has two sets of players that think in one way. One thinks in a certain way. They have incompatible geopolitical objectives, but one thinks in one way, the other one thinks in another way. But their underlying philosophical hypotheses are different. And you see that at the United Nations. The number of disagreements on things that are not geopolitical, that come out of political science, political philosophy, is increasing. So, international governance, as was built after World War II, is receding. In that scenario, what counts at the end is force. So, bilateralism may be a transition from one state to a very dangerous state. I hope not, but we will go through bilateralism. Way. But we will always think, I think, multilateralism is a good thing for us and a good thing for the world. But we will not prevail on that subject. Last question, okay?
A year and a half ago, my wife was laughing hysterically about this guy named Bolsonaro.
Yes.
And up until a month and a half ago, I came here on September 7th. It was celebrated on the 6th for independence. And there was still a level of laughter about this man, and now he's president.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I saw that built up over time where people were voicing a support for a man that was being laughed at a year and a half ago, even laughed at a month and a half ago, and was getting voices on social media from people that would ordinarily not voice support for this man, in my opinion, had to do with order in Brazil.
Of course.
And
one of the most important issues in Brazil nowadays is order. It's to go back to an orderly country.
So my question is, because I heard a statistic that said there were 68,000 homicides in Brazil last year. What is he going to do, in your opinion, to address this, and will it work? And I know there's risk and everything else, but what do you envision him doing to improve the sentiment of safety in Brazil? Because it seems to me that a big part of the populace and the middle class may have voted for him not only to get rid of PT, but to be able to go more than just a kilometer in Rio de Janeiro.
Yes, yes. I remember a time when I was 20, where I would walk 10 at night from downtown Rio to my house, or my parents' house in Flamengo. No problem at all. I could walk almost everywhere around the town. Of course, I wouldn't go into a favela at midnight, but I could walk around. And about 15 years ago, someone was shot 10 meters from the entrance of my apartment. 13 shots. The guy, amazingly, he survived. And that was a big change. So we have to go back in time. There is no reason why we shouldn't go back in time.
More military.
No, with more police. More police. Maybe a harsher application of the laws. Okay? That has to be built. It has to be done. I think it will be done. Will there be mistakes? Of course. But on the end, I think that the result, you see, Rio, I'm not saying that we have 50,000 complicated people, but at least 5,000 we have. How many jobs does that destroy on the tourist industry? 500,000. Simple as that. Very big number. Rio, you probably have seen that movie, Flying Down to Rio, from a time when Rio was far away, but it was a very interesting, a very safe city for tourists to come. That is money, that is jobs, that is business. We have to go back there. And the population, one thing that people disregard, is a profound change that started to be noticed 30 years ago by a German sociologist called Max Gaze, of a transversal communication inside societies. That was happening in Germany and the UK already 30, 35 years ago. But with the internet, it's not what the New York Times says. Of course, the New York Times still has a lot of influence, but what the internet says. And you know what Bernard Shaw said. People, intelligent people like to talk about ideas. Normal people like to talk about facts. Dumb people like to talk about people. So, what do you see most in the internet? People talking about people. And they are happy. And this is transversal communication. And doesn't matter if it's fake news or not. Se non è vero, ben trovato. Okay? So you see discussions about personal issues of presidents that you've never seen before. And people get accustomed to that, and to the soap opera, while important issues are not discussed. And the traditional media, conglomerates, newspapers, etc., are losing power. So I get the impression sometimes that people say, a year ago, many people considered this guy a lunatic. Well, did they, or was it the media? Was he considered a lunatic a year and a half ago? People were not already unhappy with the security issues in Rio, everywhere. They were. They simply catalyzed something that was there. And this has come to stay, as my tweets on the real Donald Trump tell me every day. I get the tweets from President Trump. I don't want to read the American newspapers. I want to read his tweets. That's him speaking. Okay, so it's the same thing everywhere. Okay.